وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. نحمده ونستعينه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I begin by praising Allah, declaring that we seek His help, that we trust in Him, we rely on Him, and testifying to His oneness and in the truthful claim of prophethood for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. And we call down Allah's mercy and His blessings on our Prophet and on His Ahlul Bayt. I advise myself and I advise all of us who are present to try to foster within ourselves the taqwa of Allah, fear of God, God consciousness, that we know Allah to the extent that we realize that He deserves to be feared, that we have a sense of awe in His presence. One reflection of that is that we say His name with gravity. Right? So one of the dangers, in fiqh, one of the rules that we have is that we're not allowed to touch the name of Allah, whether in Arabic or in another language in translation, without wudu. Right? So that's a fiqhi ruling. It's haram, even the word God. Right? If it's referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we have to be careful about how we deal with that name. And so even just that physical rule is there, that we shouldn't touch the name of Allah if we don't have wudu. Right? And that gives us a sense of the sanctity of that name. Right? There are other ramifications of that as well. We shouldn't do anything that's sacrilegious towards that name, throwing away paper with that name. Casually printing the name of Allah on paper as well is something that we should be very careful about, especially as followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Right? Sometimes wedding invitations, oftentimes they want the tabarruk of having Allah's name, so they say in the name of God and Bismillah and verses of Quran, but it's an invitation that while it's very special, they put a lot of investment into creating a beautiful card, eventually it's going to be thrown away. So that we shouldn't put Allah's name in those kinds of places where they will eventually be cast aside, thrown away, neglected, right? Because of the special place that Allah's name has. So if just the word of Allah, the word of God has such importance and should have such a place for us, then of course He Himself, His remembrance should also have a very high place in our regard. And so we shouldn't mention His name casually without due respect. Remembering Allah often, speaking about Him often, saying His name often also is great, but it shouldn't be a casual thing. Right? So even in the Ten Commandments, the first commandment is that you shouldn't take Allah's name in vain. Right? That's the same idea that we have. In vain means in a casual way, in a disrespectful way. The same way I might call you or you might call me in a casual way. Even there should be some respect, but we should not refer to Allah in the same way. So all of that is one little glimmer into the respect that we should have for Allah and His existence, and that's one glimmer of what it means to have taqwa, a constant observance of the sanctity of Allah and His name. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the first khutbah, I'd like to reflect a little bit on this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, kutiba alaykum al-qitalu wa huwa kurhun lakum, wa asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khayrun lakum, wa asa an tuhibbu shay'an wa huwa sharrun lakum, wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun." The verse begins, I believe it's 261, that might be the verse number if I'm not mistaken, in Surah Al-Baqarah. So the verse begins by telling the believers that qital, that fighting, has been prescribed for them. Kutiba alaykum, that phrase comes several times in the Quran. It's been written for you, meaning it's been decreed that you must engage. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, kutiba alaykum al-qisasu fil qatla. Right, so that phrase comes in the Quran that's where Allah says, this is hereby decreed that you must do such and such, you must do such and such. So kutiba alaykum al-qital. Qital comes from the same word as qatl, killing, but qital, muqatala, means to fight one another. So in this case, it's jihad. Right? The permission hadn't been given to the Muslims early on to engage in jihad. They were supposed to avoid any sorts of engagement because the odds were against them. They didn't have the strength to be able to have a potentially good outcome. And so they were told to try to avoid any sort of engagement. But at one point, when their strength was there, then Allah says, now you have been given permission to engage. And He says that you have been commanded to fight while fighting is disliked by you. وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Kurh comes from the same word as makruh, karaha, right? To have a dislike for something, a distaste for something, not to appeal to you. Right, so while fighting is distasteful to you, nonetheless, it has been written for you. It's been prescribed for you. So one question is why was it distasteful to the Muslims early on? So there are different reasons that our Mufassirin have given for why this might have been the case. It could have just been a weakness of faith, right? Fighting is, the stakes are higher than perhaps, certainly anything that I've ever been in, perhaps anything that you've ever been in. If you're to put your life on the line, right, for the sake of the deen, I don't know if you've ever had that opportunity, that challenge in your life to say it's either, life or faith, right? But that's the question, that's the problem of qital, of jihad, that the stakes are that high. It's your life on the line. And this is difficult, of course. We can only imagine how difficult it must be when you're actually there in that position. And so the Muslims were hesitant. They said, this is a very difficult proposition. Our own death is a possibility. Our own life is at stake. Our family's welfare, who will take care of our family if we were to go out and fight and be killed or be injured. Loss of money. They can come and they can, once they've killed us, then they can take our belongings and our families will be left in poverty. So the stakes are very high, and so maybe this is why some of the Muslims felt like this is not a good idea. And so they disliked the proposition of fighting. And Allah says, despite the fact that you might not like it, it's being made obligatory for you. And there's some other reasons that have also been given, but this seems like a pretty reasonable idea. And it's not that they were weak in faith and we would have been better. We don't know, unless we've been in that situation, we don't know how we would be. We can only reflect, we can try to put ourselves in their shoes and then strengthen ourselves to the point where we feel like we'll make our best effort to make the right decisions in those kinds of situations. And then pray to Allah that He keeps us steadfast in those positions, because until we actually face them, we won't know how we will fare. Then He says, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Yes, تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It's likely that you might dislike something when in fact it is the best thing for you. And then He continues and says, and sometimes you might dislike something. Did I say it the wrong way around? The first is dislike something when it's the best thing for you, and it's sometimes the case that you like something when it's actually the worst thing for you. And He ends the verse by saying, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah knows what's truly good for you, what's truly bad for you, and you don't know. All right. So in the context of the verse, it's clear. Allah is prescribing something for the Muslims. It's something that where the stakes are high: life, soundness of body, wealth, the integrity of your city. All these things are on the line, and that's a very steep price to have to pay. But Allah is telling them that I know that in this commandment and in your fulfillment of this commandment, there is much to be gained, and what you will gain by engaging the way I'm telling you to is better than whatever you fear that you might lose in the exchange. Right? So trust me, I know better, I know what benefit there is in this. Engage in it despite the fact that you don't like it. And what's the evidence for that? He casts a little bit of doubt in their hearts, saying that do you really know what's really good for you, what's really bad for you? Oftentimes it happens that you think something's good and it turns out to be bad, and vice versa. Sometimes you think something's going to be bad and it turns out to be good. So how do you know that this qital, this fighting, which is a scary proposition, how do you know whether this is good for you or not? I, Allah, who know everything, I know. And I have your best interest at heart, and I'm telling you, engage. Because I know that even if you lose your own life personally, you lose, the entire army loses the battle, I know that the good that comes out of this engagement, it far outweighs whatever small losses, in the big picture, what small losses you might face, despite the fact that those losses might seem like something very significant to you. All right, so that's a little bit of understanding of the verse itself. The question that arises from that middle part of the verse, عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. It seems like it's calling into question our ability to know what's good and what's bad. Right, what brought this to my mind recently was somebody came to me with a question. A parent came saying that they're trying to, they made some decision and the children are, they don't like it. Right, so the parents have made a decision for the family. In this case, it was to move somewhere. And the children, being uprooted from school, being uprooted from friendships, and just stability, they don't like the idea of going somewhere where all that goes. And so the parents they thought of this verse and they said, doesn't this verse speak to this? Can I tell my kids that sometimes you don't like something, but it's actually better for you? Right? So they're cherry picking the verse, only that part was good for them, the rest of it. Sometimes it happens that you like something and it's actually bad for you. Right? That could equally apply to the parents. If they're making this decision, they think that they have job prospects or whatever opportunities that they think that they're going into, but maybe they've made the wrong decision, and in reality, when they get there, they'll realize that they've made a bad decision. All right. So this usage of the verse, this understanding that this parent had of the verse, this is not correct. Right? Allah is not trying to call into question. We don't give up our agency and say, oh, I don't know anything. I can't tell what's good and what's bad, so I have no judgment. I can't make a decision. That's not the way we live as Muslims. That's not the way we're supposed to live as Muslims. Allah has given us faculties. Right? We know those faculties and we use those faculties. Intellect being the primary one. Our intellect, our aql, has the ability to know good and know bad. It's drawn towards good. It analyzes it, evaluates situations, and says, here are the pros and cons. The pros outweigh the cons, so this is the decision I'm going to make based on the evidence that I have at my disposal. Right? So our intellect is a tool that we have that we're supposed to access. Not only our own intellect, من شارك الرجال من شاور الرجال شاركها في عقولها. Right? We're encouraged not only to use our own intellect, but then to do mushawara. Right? Shawirhum fil amr, do mushawara, consult with other people who have intellect, who have experience, who have wisdom, and then share in their intellect, so that not only do we tap into our own experience and our own wisdom, but now we can broaden our horizons and benefit from even more wisdom. And if we do that, then the decisions we make can be even greater in their overall benefit for ourselves and deflection of harm. We have a fitrah, the fitrah that Allah has put within us. It's something that's programmed within us. It has certain tastes, certain knowledge. We're attracted to goodness. We're attracted to justice. Right? If I ask you, for instance, do you want to be a good person? No sane person would say, no, I don't really care for being good. I'm indifferent towards goodness. Right? We're naturally inclined towards goodness. Now, what goodness entails, what kind of actions, what kind of being is good, that's a different question. Then there is room to have discussion and evaluate different things. Is it good to do this or good to do that? But to be good, if I say, do you want to be successful? Of course we want to be successful. There's no question, no person would say, no, I don't really care for success. We're naturally drawn towards it through our fitrah that Allah has placed in us. We're attracted towards things that are good, towards things that are positive. Naturally we have a dislike for things that are displeasing and negative and harmful to ourselves. And so this is the fitrah that Allah has placed within us, and it's part of our decision-making process that we're supposed to access and tap into. So in the verse, why does he tell us that you don't really know? Sometimes you like things, it's bad for you. Sometimes you don't like things, they're good for you. It seems to leave you with a sense that, okay, then I shouldn't really go by my taste, my sense, my emotion. If I like something, maybe I should stay away from it because maybe it's bad for me. If I don't like something, maybe I should suck it up and do it because maybe it's good for me. But if that's the way we're going to live, then how do we make decisions? What kind of judgments do we make? What kind of life do we live? And why in the first place did Allah put that intellect and encourage us to do mushawara? Why did He give us a fitrah? Why did He give us all these faculties to make decisions if in the end He wants us just to throw our hands up and say we don't really know? We have to see, for one thing, what is the source of information that we're getting, right? Sometimes we give up agency too quickly. As believers, right? Sometimes believers will have the tendency to use faith as a way to escape from having to make a decision. Right? Is it good to do a particular action on a particular day of the month? Right? We don't really know. Say, well, I believe in this. I have faith in this. Is there benefit in doing this particular practice or using this particular, having this kind of food on this particular day? Maybe it's something that's been passed down as a tradition, as an old wives' tale. Mothers and grandmothers have taught you something. And we say, well, I just have faith. I believe in it. I have faith in it. And then we do it just because it's been passed down without using any sort of evidence-based approach to say, is this something that we have evidence for? Is there a hadith that tells us this is a good action or a bad action that we should do or avoid? If we know, as in the case of the verse, where Allah Himself is saying, Kutiba alaykum al-qital, He's telling you you have to do something, then here there's no question about me evaluating and saying, was it good or bad? Let me think about it first, and once I evaluate the situation, then I'll say, yes, I'll do what you want me to do. If it doesn't seem like it's so much, then maybe I'll say, no, God, I'm not going to do that. Once I know that it's Allah who's telling me as a believer, then my duty is clear, right? I have no agency to question Him and say, this doesn't seem like the best thing. I know you're telling me to do this, and maybe you have some knowledge, but I have some other knowledge. We have no room to say anything like that. Once we establish that it's Allah who's speaking to us, a ma'soom who's speaking to us and telling us that we have to do something. But there are other places where we do have agency. In mubahat, things that are permissible, permitted, right? So it's not something that's wajib, not something that's clearly haram, not even something that's mustahab or makruh, where we have evidence to say that it's favorable or not favorable to do it. But mubahat are things that basically Allah is saying that there's no significant reason to do it or not to do it. And the discretion to engage or not engage is fully up to you. Right? Drinking water. If I'm thirsty, if my health depends on it, then it's wajib to drink water. Right? If I'm fasting, then it's haram to drink water. So there it's clear because there are certain circumstances that make it wajib or haram to drink water. But if I just have a glass of water and I just feel like drinking it, it's not mustahab to drink it, it's not makruh to drink it. It's mubah, it's up to me. I can decide that I feel like drinking it, I don't feel like drinking it, and I have the choice, and I can make that choice freely. And there are no consequences spiritually, no consequences legally for making one choice or the other, because it's been left up to me to make that decision. Right? So many aspects of our life are in that category, mubahat, where we have the ability to make those choices. So in the cases where it's clear that where the source of the law is, where we're being told, in our case through our sharia, right, through the system of ijtihad and taqleed, it comes to us that it's wajib to do something, it's haram to do something, we don't have any agency to say, but what about this and what about that? Let me evaluate this and I'll get back to you. And then I'll make a decision whether I'm going to act on the wajib or whether I'm going to avoid the haram. Yes, I can make that choice, but it's a sinful choice. If I choose to say it's wajib, but I'm not going to do it, it's a sinful choice. I'm disobeying Allah's clear commandment. And same for the haram. But in circumstances where it's mubah, where we're dealing with mubahat, then we have agency and we have the abilities through our intellect, through our experience to make decisions. There we have to just see what the stakes are. Right? What are the stakes involved? Are the stakes so high that I need to be very cautious? Or are the stakes relatively low, in which case I have the choice, and you could also even say it's a better choice to be a little bit daring. At least it makes you more interesting if you're daring with safe choices, where the stakes are not so high. We're not talking about life and death situations. Right, so we have this hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, recite salawat. In Nahj al-Balagh, in the short sayings, he says, إِذَا هِبْتَ أَمْرًا فَقَعْ فِيهِ. If you're scared about something, if you're worried about some situation, throw yourself into it. فَإِنَّ شِدَّةَ تَوَقِّيهِ أَعْظَمُ مِمَّا تَخَافُ مِنْهِ. It's basically, I think it's FDR who said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Is that the right person who said that? Anyway, one of the early 20th century presidents said this, Truman or Eisenhower or someone. But this is what Imam Ali is saying as well, that sometimes it's the fear itself, the tawaqqi, that fear that you have within you, that sometimes is greater than the thing that you're actually afraid of. All right, so what is he talking about here? Is he talking about life and death situations? I'm scared of climbing to the top of a tall tower and dangling myself off the side, so should I throw myself into it and overcome my fear? Should I go hang glide and jump off with a bungee cord and risk my life in those sort of situations? Because I feel scared, I should just throw myself into it? No, where the stakes are high, when it's an unwise choice, where in this case it's a thrill, that may be the greatest thing you get out of it, but the danger of life and limb is very high, there absolutely not. Okay, there we have a clear mandate to guard life and limb and health and those kinds of things, and the thrill is not worth the consequences, the potential consequences. But in many situations where the stakes are lower, I'm scared of giving a speech, I'm scared of talking to a particular person, right? So sometimes we psych ourselves out, we build up all these scenarios, and we get ourselves tongue-tied because the situation seems so big in our mind that, what is it going to be like if I'm standing in front of a bunch of people? I'll be nervous, and my mouth will go dry, and I won't know what to say, and we psych ourselves out because we worry so much about the situation. If we can just get over that and push ourselves into the situation and just do it, then we realize that actually it becomes a lot easier. And the worry that I had was actually the biggest thing to be afraid of. The actual situation was actually quite easy, maybe even pleasant. And so through that we can overcome hurdles, we can break through barriers and become more capable people with greater experiences, more colorful people, right? By breaking down some of those barriers in our life, cultural barriers. Maybe some people are very particular about their food. It has to be cooked a certain way. Only their own ethnic food, that's the only way food can be cooked, and they don't cross the line to explore other kinds of food. Now, if this becomes a kind of chauvinism, where I feel like my food is the best, my culture is the best, and everyone else's culture is inferior, then now we have a religious question, a moral question. That's not the right attitude to have towards other cultures. Cultures they're equal in terms of good and bad. There's no sense in saying one's superior to another. But if it's a matter of just I'm not comfortable, right? I've tied myself into this particular kind of cuisine or culture and these kinds of things, and I'm afraid to go out of that box, then this hadith of Imam Ali saying, throw yourself into it, go try it, go explore, go be adventurous, right? Within the bounds of halal and haram, be adventurous, because the worry that you have that, maybe I won't like it and this and that, that's much greater than the actual experience itself. Once you do it, then you'll probably actually find pleasure. At the very least, your fear will be gone, and now you'll be a lot easier in the world, and you'll be able to explore and be a more interesting person. So we do have agency. We do have the ability to reason, to use our intellect. The verse is not calling that into question. It's not making us question our own ability to make a judgment. That maybe you like something but it's bad, maybe you don't like something and it's good, so just throw your hands up and say, I don't know, just tell me what to do. No. There are places where we don't have the ability. In this case, Allahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun. Allah knows and you don't know what's the greatest good spiritually, the greatest good in terms of the ramifications of fighting and either winning or losing. You don't understand all of the consequences that are going to come of this particular action. So Allah is telling you something that you don't have access to. So once Allah is telling you something, then here we have incomplete knowledge and emotion and these kinds of things. Allah has perfect knowledge, perfect wisdom, our best interest at heart, His best interest at heart. Of course, His commandment is going to take precedence over anything that we can say. But where He's given us agency, where we have, the stakes are not high, and He said, you make your own decision. You navigate, you try this, you try that, and you can make your own decisions. Here, absolutely we have agency. Here, we should make our decisions with Islamic guidelines in mind, but also with our psyche in mind, that we explore and we break through barriers, that we try things, because sometimes that fear that we have is much greater than the thing itself. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصلي لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات الله محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل وسلم على رسول الله وعلى أمير المؤمنين وعلى فاطمة الزهراء وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أوصيكم بتقوى الله واتباع أمره. Once again, I call all of us to think about taqwa, this quality of fearing God, being conscious of Him, so that all of the decisions that we make in our life are always with an eye to His pleasure and displeasure. In the second khutbah, very briefly, because we're in the first 10 days of the Hijja, I just wanted to share some ahadith about the udhiyah and some of the practices that we should be engaging in during these first 10 days. So we're told in ahadith that one of the significances, historical significances of the first 10 days of the Hijja is it's the last 10 days of the 40-day stint that Musa alayhi salam spent on the mountain. Right? وَوَعَدْنَا مُوسَى 30 لَيْلَةً Allah made this covenant with Musa that he should spend 30 days on the mountain. وَأَتْمَمْنَاهَا بِعَشْرٍ. And then, starting with the first of the Hijjah, he changed that decision and said 10 more days. And it's during that 10 days that Samiri was able to misguide many of the Bani Israel who were waiting for Musa to come back down with the 70 men who had gone up the mountain to receive revelation. And when he doesn't come back and these 10 days pass, they succumb to Samiri's doubts and this creation of this golden calf that he makes. So these 10 days are, according to ahadith, they match up with those last 10 days of the 40. So they're special for that. One of the practices that we can do that ties our Hajj together with Musa's story is there's a very simple amal between Maghrib and Isha. It's a 2 rak'ah prayer. You can find it in Mafatih al-Jinan. It's a 2 rak'ah prayer, and it's Fatiha, Surah Al-Ikhlas, Qul huwallahu ahad, and then this verse that I just started, وَوَاعَدْنَا مُوسَى 30 لَيْلَةً وَأَتْمَمْنَاهَا بِعَشْرٍ فَتَمَّ مِيقَاتُ رَبِّهِ 40 لَيْلَةً وَقَالَ مُوسَى لِأَخِيهِ هَارُونَ اخْلُفْنِي فِي قَوْمِي وَأَصْلِحْ وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. It's the verse that refers to this story, 30 plus 10 days that became 40, and what happened, how Musa left Harun alayhi salam as his deputy. the reward that we are offered for reciting this prayer during these 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah is that we then share in the reward of those who are at Hajj. Right? So the stakes are high. The reward is very high and for a very simple rite of worship. But that significantly ties those two events together. Another important thing that we should be doing during these 10 days is making arrangements for our udhiyah. So udhiyah, this is a term that you may or may not be familiar with. The term in the Quran is hadi. Hadi, the sukun and the dal. Hadi is the animal that you sacrifice if you're at Hajj. Right? So you go for Hajj, then you go to Mina, and at Mina, the animal that you buy there and sacrifice is called a hadi. Ha, dal, ya. For those of us who are not at Hajj, then it's still recommended to kill an animal. Right? On Eid, that animal, the term that we use in our ahadith and our fiqh is udhiyah. It comes from the same root as Eid al-Adha. Right? That means to sacrifice. So the udhiyah is the sacrificial animal. Right? So lots of recommendations to do this. And it's a practice that unfortunately, in my observation, the Shia community has done a much worse job at practicing this than our Sunni counterparts. So in the Sunni community, whether it's abroad, whether it's in America, they're very conscientious. Every family will engage in this, they'll sacrifice an animal. In Shia communities, typically, people don't take this very seriously. And it's a shame. It's not wajib, it's mustahab, but it's one of those mustahabat, it's one of those sha'a'irullah, those things that Allah wants us to engage in and to make a big deal of, and it becomes like one of those rallying cries, one of those times during the year when we really kind of celebrate our identity as Muslims. And so we should do our best to try to engage in this. I'll share a couple of hadith to hopefully inspire you, motivate you to engage in this. The first hadith is from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. He says, "Al-udhiyatu wajibatun ala man wajada min saghirin aw kabirin wa hiya sunnah." Right, so he says that doing the sacrifice, the sacrificial animal, he uses the term wajib, but our fuqaha say that sometimes in ahadith they'll use the term wajib or mustahab or makruh. It doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one correlation with our fiqhi terminology. So when he says wajib, it's not that it's wajib, meaning if you don't do it, it's haram, but it's wajib, it's something I really want you to do. He's trying to encourage us to say this is something, it's a duty you have to do. Right? But it doesn't translate into wajib, it translates into a mustahab mu'akkad, something that's recommended and highly emphasized. Like the ghusl for Jumu'ah. Right? The ghusl of Jumu'ah is not wajib, it's mustahab, but it's a mustahab mu'akkad, something that we're highly recommended to do. Whether you're attending Jumu'ah or not, you should do the ghusl of Jumu'ah. If you miss it on Friday, you can do the qada on Saturday. Right? It's that mustahab that there's a qada for the ghusl of Jumu'ah if you miss it on Friday itself. And he says that it's highly recommended, even almost mandatory on every small person, big person, young and old. And this is a sunnah of the Prophet, he says. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi says, إِنَّمَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ هَذَا الْأَضْحَى لِتَشْبَعَ مَسَاكِينُكُم مِّنَ اللَّحْمِ فَأَطْعِمُوهُم. That one of the reasons why Allah has made this Eid is so that we can fill the stomachs of the poor people. So he says, feed them. Right? So that's one of the reasons why we do the sacrifice. Right? Meat is typically, if not a luxury, but it's something that not everyone can afford, especially at least not at will. And so those of us who are able to afford it like that, we can provide that meat at least once a year to those who are not able to freely have that meat. And so there's a recommendation in one hadith that even says that explicitly, that when you sacrifice your animal, 1/3 of that, it's good to dedicate that to the needy. And then 1/3 of it you can distribute to friends and family. And then the other 1/3 you should consume yourself. All right? And even consuming it is something that's good. It's not just that this is all charity. Since charity is good, I should give it all away. No, eating some of it yourself is also part of the recommendation. All right, one of the differences between Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha on the actual day, in Eid al-Fitr, we just got done with fasting for Ramadan, it's recommended that you first eat something and then you come to Eid prayers. But on Eid al-Adha, you're recommended not to eat anything until you go do your prayers, go kill your animal, and then take some meat from the animal, cook it, and then that should be the first thing you eat that day. But sometimes practically it's a little bit challenging because then depending on how you kill your animal, it may be 3 days later that you get your meat. So you can implement that how you can, but that's the recommendation, that you eat actually from the meat of the animal that you've killed. All right, I'll share one more hadith with you, and then we'll close the khutbah. So this is from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. قال, yes. The narrator Abu Basir, he asks, Ma illatul udhiyah? What's the wisdom, what's the philosophy behind this sacrificial animal? Imam al-Sadiq says, إِنَّهُ يُغْفَرُ لِصَاحِبِهَا عِنْدَ أَوَّلِ قَطْرَةٍ تَقْطُرُ مِنْ دَمِهَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ. From the very first drop of blood that spills from this animal that you're sacrificing, right, the sins of the one who is doing the sacrifice are forgiven. وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ مَنْ يَتَّقِيهِ بِالْغَيْبِ. Another reason is that Allah wants to know who has taqwa of Him, despite the fact that we don't see Him. Right? So one of the ways we can express our taqwa is by engaging in a sacrifice. Right? Sacrificing, we're paying money, we're sacrificing that. If you are someone who raises animals, you're sacrificing those animals. Right? But you're giving something, and you're putting all that effort in for the sake of Allah. When it's not something He requires of us, it's not something that He is telling us we have to do, or there's no one enforcing it, but it's our own desire to try to please Him that motivates us to try to engage in the sacrifice. And then he recommends that as you're sacrificing, you should say the following dua. He says, Bismillahi wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal-ard حنيفا مسلما وما أنا من المشركين إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين اللهم منك ولك. And this animal is from you, and I'm giving it back to you. منك ولك اللهم هذا عن نبيك ثم يذبحه ويذبح كبشا آخر عن نفسه. And one recommendation is that you can sacrifice an animal on behalf of others. So if you're only doing one animal for your family, then do it not only on your own behalf, but on behalf of your wife and children, for instance. You could do it on behalf of Rasulullah, on behalf of the Ma'sumeen. Right? So include them in your niyyah. And so even some of the ahadith tell us that imams would do one animal on behalf of Rasulullah, and then one for themselves and their family. Right? So these kinds of practices are also there, and that only increases the reward. We're not decreasing our reward by sharing the reward. We're actually increasing our reward, because it's like with tawassul and with shafa'ah, we're linking ourselves to people whose actions are more acceptable to Allah than our own. Right? And so then it actually magnifies the significance of our deed, because now it's not only my sacrifice for the sake of Allah, it's now the sacrifice that I'm making on behalf, by building this connection with Rasulullah, with the Ma'sum, and so forth. So it becomes actually a better deed, a more pleasing deed to Allah. So inshallah, this is something that we can engage in on Eid al-Adha next week on Friday. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. صلاة الجمعة. الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.